Hi, I'm Peter Kerr. Welcome to Rock Daydream Nation. I've got Reed Little with me. G'day, Reed. How are you going?
Doing great, Peter. How are things down under?
Fantastic, and Happy New Year,
Happy New Year.
2022. Today we're going to do an album, 1979. Get the Knack, self-titled. The Knack was first formed in 1978. They recorded an album, the self-titled album in 1979 called Get the Knack. It sold 6 million copies. My Sharona was the big hit off the album. It's a power pop song that's played to this very day. The Knack, I think, were part of a sort of a genre called power pop. Power pop originates from bands such as the Beatles, the Who, where it's a pop song in a little bit aggressive, more of a rock structure, very melodic. Bands like the Who, early part of the 70s, the Raspberries, and I think around 1978 or 1977, Cheap Trick were probably one of the most popular bands in that genre of the power pop. I think the precursor to Get the Knack was probably Cheap Trick earlier in that year, 1979, with Live at Budokan, which was their top 5 million seller album that really pushed the power pop genre right to the fore. But anyway, we're talking about Get the Knack. Reed, have you ever heard Get the Knack before now? And
All
tell
right.
us
So
about it.
prior to preparing for this chat, probably like many people, I had heard exactly one Knack song, and that was My Sharona. So now I am of an age that I was listening to music. I wasn't an avid music fan in 1979, but you could not escape that song. It was everywhere. People were, if you heard the car radios going by, they were playing My Sharona. You go to a restaurant and it's on the jukebox. I was a kid at the time. I was 11 years old. So we'd go to the roller skating rink and they're playing My Sharona at the roller skating rink. You could not escape that song. It was all encompassing, and I loved it, but I was never tempted to track down the rest of it. And some of that is because I remember even now that the Knack had kind of a bad reputation. Like, this was not a band that kids should be listening to. Now, again, I was 11, so I didn't really know or care about that sort of thing. I just thought they had one catchy song, but so be it. So I listened to My Sharona. And I mean, it was so catchy that even after not having heard it for 30 years, I could still sing it almost word for word. It's a powerful, powerful song. So I didn't really know what to expect listening to the album. And I listened to it once. So I did not buy a physical copy of it. I listened to it on streaming. Which again, I don't recommend. I'm a big fan of listening to something that's at least CD quality audio. You get a better experience. But there are financial limitations that people have too. I get that. So I listened to it once and I thought, that's really good. It reminds me a bit of the Cars, which came out in the same year or around the same time, although from the opposite coast. The music is very, for the most part, very upbeat. It's very happy sounding. It reminds me a lot of the Kinks and the Who. The music is not, even the lead guitar is not distorted. It's very clean. It's very bright. It's very up in the mix. The thing that makes it more American sounding is the drums. The drums are very kind of aggressive and frantic, like a surf rock kind of drum from the 1960s. So I really thought, oh, this sounds like bubblegum pop, very well played bubblegum pop, but kind of disposable. So on my second playthrough, I started listening to it instead of just, had it in the background, kind of get my overall impression, and paying attention to the lyrics. And that changes everything. And no matter how pretty the singer's voice is, and I'm sorry, I didn't look up any of the members' names, so I don't know what the singer's name is.
Doug Fieger.
Figure, okay.
Yeah, Doug Fieger.
He writes about some dark subjects. And apparently he had problems with women, because 6 of the 12 tracks on this album are about evil, manipulative women and how they will screw up your life. And that really, after a while, I was like, dang, man, see a therapist. This guy has some issues. I mean, half of the tracks on the album are about how evil girls are. That's really something. And a couple of the songs are very explicit. The first one that really grabbed me was "She's So Selfish." I've got notes off here to the right. And the lyrics on that track are really, I mean, they're really explicit. Talking about how she doesn't give a shit about anybody but herself. And I was thinking, wow, this is really angry, but he sings it very sweetly. He has a beautiful voice, and they've got orchestration, and it sounds fantastic. And I thought, man, in 1979, was that as socially unacceptable as it is now? I mean, clearly not. Everyone just kind of rolled with it. But I'm like, wow, okay, let's see what else he has. Oh, and I have to call out their guitar players. Phenomenal. He doesn't always get solos, but when he plays, they're beautiful.
Burton Avery. I mean, sorry, interjecting quite
quickly. No, go ahead.
The solo in My Sharona is probably one of my favorite guitar solos of all time.
The long form one, like at the end of the song,
yeah, absolutely.
And, just him.
And I know in the day, so many aspiring guitar players were so ticked off that the single actually edited that out because they wanted to get maximum airplay on the radio stations, and they had to lose the guitar solo. But the guitar solo is just sublime. And
it's amazing.
He is a crack guitarist. Anyway, sorry.
So it's really, it's a yin yang album for me. It's beautiful. It's well produced. It sounds amazing. The guys play phenomenally, especially the drummer and the guitar player. There's even a harmonica solo, which is always an interesting choice for a pop song. They sing beautifully. I love harmony vocals. I've always loved harmony vocals. And there's some great harmony. There's some great doo-wop kind of choruses. Again, it's very like updated 1960s style music, but the lyrical content, even at its most beautiful, can be so aggressive in a way that makes it more interesting. Like there's a song, oh, sorry. I want to make sure I get the title right here.
Would Frustrated be one of the ones?
Frustrated is definitely one of the ones, although it's not the particular one I was thinking of. Oh, Siamese Twins, The Monkey and Me.
Yeah. Another one, controversial one, was Good Girls Don't.
Yes.
They had to edit a Sitting on Your Face line for the radio version. Look, definitely some controversy in the lyrics, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But and the drummer, I'll put a shout out, is the late Bruce Gary, definitely in the Keith Moon mold. If you ever have the opportunity to see the Knack live on YouTube, I think the clip to see is probably live at Carnegie Hall. He is a dynamo, and all of their songs are just sped up. They're like they're on amphetamines. It's like The Who. And Bruce Gary is the dynamo. He just drives that band together. They can play. They were no dummies. They could actually play.
Of course, Keith Moon, also a huge fan of American surf rock. So, which Pete Townsend complains about a lot in interviews. But that was one of the things that gave the Who their identity, was they had that American surf rock drumming.
Yeah.
So those are all great things. And in the end, so the Knack isn't exactly what I normally listen to. I thought it was a good album. I thought it has some phenomenal performances. I thought it has some objectionable lyrics. But the thing that you simply can't get past on this album is the song My Sharona. It is so good. It is so dominant that every other song on this album might as well not exist. It's like you listen to the album waiting for that song to come up. And then it's there. And then when it's gone, everything else is diminished because that song is just so strong. And that's a problem for a band, right? And it happened a strange amount in 1979. I was thinking, what else came out? Gary Newman's Cars in 1979. So same year, he never had anything that was close to that powerful. Certainly not on the radio. I guess I've never listened to Gary Newman's catalog, but if I were to get a Gary Newman album, it would be the same thing. I would be waiting for Cars to come up. And then after Cars finished, I would move on and do something else, because that song is so in there. My Sharona starts with drum and bass, exactly like Another One Bites the Dust, which came out in 1979. So people were really drilling down on things that created that hook. And those particular sounds were everywhere in 1979.
Well, I reckon, Reed, if you're going to have one song to, sort of live by, My Sharona's a mighty song.
Yeah.
The tom and the snare. Interesting. I've read a lot of articles from Bert Navarre, and he sort of said that Pump It Up by Elvis Costello, maybe not necessarily the melody line, but the drums, the drum sound was quite influential in the creation of the My Sharona song.
Okay.
Which is quite interesting, but it's one of the greatest, sort of perfect pop songs. I don't think it's just, it can't be knocked. I think it's just, a fantastic hook laden song, and it's still resonates today. It's in music videos, it's been sampled, it's in advertisements, it was in movies. Reality Bites gave it a new lease of life, and it charted again, and the Knack reformed. Yeah, look, I probably have a different sort of opinion of this album. I think out of the power pop sort of class of 1979, I love Cheap Trick, but I always come back to this album. And I think that if there are some great songs on this album, I think, for example, if the first single was Let Me Out, which was the B-side to My Sharona and is the first song on this album, then maybe you may have had a different perspective, because I think Let Me Out is a nice little Beatles romper. I don't know why it was a B-side. It should have been an A-side. So if they sort of did Let Me Out as the first single and then My Sharona, or maybe Good Girls Don't, it might have had added more legs to this album in respect to people saying, oh, one hit wonder, they've only got one song, because there's so many good songs. Now I'll talk about the musicianship, and we'll talk about the lyrics in a second. So the musicianship of this album and this band is second to none.
No,
the band themselves, Doug Feger, actually started in a band called Sky in the early 70s. They recorded, so he was in a lot of bands. So was, Bert Navarre, and they formed in 1978. This album was recorded in a couple of weeks for $17,000. The producer was Mike Chapman, who did a lot of work with Blondie. And previous to that, he worked with Susie Quattro, Slade. And, he's an Australian producer extraordinaire. So 2 weeks, went in, did the album. And, I think a lot of it is just perfect, blissful pop. The musicianship, it's just very organic. And that style of power pop doesn't age, because there is a lot of music that you listen to and you think it's very much of its time. But this album, you listen to it and you think it's quite timeless. And to me, I've always found that the album is like, it distills all those beat groups in the 60s, whether it's the Who, the Beatles, even a little bit of the Beach Boys, but makes it more contemporary with raunchier lyrics. And then we get into the lyrics side of it. So a lot of it is the lyrics. And I think I've had this battle in my head for a number of years about the lyrics. And, they copped a fair amount of criticism for, the lyrics being quite sexist. And being derogatory to women. And Doug Fieger sort of said that it was written from a perspective of an adolescent teenager. So a 14-year-old boy, and it's sort of, you know, locker talk. And that was the perspective of the album. So they were in their late 20s when they, you know, created this album, but the lyrical content and the construction of the songs was, you know, from a perspective of the adolescence. So not all of the songs are, you know, of that sexualized raunchiness. There are some really sweet songs, and they even throw in a Heartbeat, you know, the old Buddy Holly song, which is on side 2, you know, for those who have records, track 2. So if you can get into that sort of perspective that a lot of those raunchier songs like Good Girls Don't and Frustrated and the dynamics of teenage lust and romance, and, you know, you buy that, then the album becomes a better listening experience to you. But if you don't buy that and you think they're just being sneering and it's sexist, then it's harder to convince yourself that this album is as good as it should be, if you know what I mean. So that's the perspective. Do you buy that they are actually writing as a perspective of a teenager, you know, with the sex and the romance and the, you know, being 14, 15, or late 20s and writing it in that sort of perspective? That's the thing that you need to sort of get your head around.
Right. And that's an interesting question too, especially listening to it later in life, right? Because here in our 50s, have a very different perspective on it than when I was listening to it at 11 years old and people were telling me, oh, this song is so nasty. And I'm like, really? I don't hear anything nasty in it. There are no bad words in My Sharona. Now it's his ode to his 17-year-old lover that turned him on so much. You know, and okay, I guess.
Unrequited at that time. He wrote it. I think they became a couple afterwards, but he was writing it as sort of a love letter towards this Sharona, and they did become a couple after that song.
Right.
But look, in a context, this album was huge. Like 1978, 77 was, you know, just disco. And I think 1979, it switched a lot of ears to that classic 4-piece band sound. And I think that's a big positive. But after that, there was a backlash. And there was a big backlash. And I think this is an incredible story that in such a short space of time, that this band did go down a slippery dip. And so firstly, there's a couple of things here. You look at the album cover. Okay, get the Knack. Now it looks quite familiar. Well, you've got, you know, the lead singer. He's sort of looking very confident. And then there's comparisons to this.
Right.
The Beatles. So I think that's commercial kind of suicide, where you compare yourself to the Beatles, and whether they did or didn't, a lot of critics were sort of saying, look at the Knack, they're comparing themselves to the Beatles. Another thing is, during the period of where they were at their absolute peak, because this album, both My Sharona and the album went to #1, sold millions of copies, they had a no interview policy. So for about 6 months, they were probably the most popular rock band in the world, no interview policy. And that comes across as quite arrogant.
Especially for a first-time band.
For a first-time band. And then the backlash, you know, went into a lot of criticism against their lyrics, and then the backlash started. And I don't know if you had the opportunity, Reed, to listen to their follow-up. They did a follow-up album, you know, Let the Girls Understand. That didn't go so well. It's got some good songs on it, but commercially, it only went gold. I don't think it hit the top 10. And, you know, their third album, Round Trip, which was out either in 81 or 82, you know, basically troubled the top 100. And then it was kind of over and out. So in a very short space of time, they were like at top of the world, but there were a couple of things that sort of, didn't allow the longevity of the band.
Right.
Comparison to the Beatles, no interview policy, and maybe, criticism about their lyrical content. And then lots of piled on criticism. It got quite hysterical. At that time, there was like Nuke the Knack. So there was a big backlash. And it's an interesting case study how a band can be so popular, but in a short space of time, they fall off the cliff. And, the second album didn't do so well. And the third, it was kind of over and out. But to me, I think it's an album that I always dip into. I think it's catchy as hell. And just the musicianship side of it. Look, I'll impress again. You've just got to look at their live clips, because these guys could certainly play. And, I think that really stands up for themselves, because they certainly understood, the heritage of that sort of music that they were playing, and distilling it and putting into the sort of the songs that they were putting in this album. So, Reed, any final thoughts on this?
So I was thinking as I was listening to it, and by the way, I thought of the Kinks a lot when I was listening to them, and maybe just because the Knack, the Kinks, lots of K's around, very similar, but that's a real slippery slope when one of the things that you're known for as a band is how raunchy your lyrics are. And I think that's accepted in the rock world, right? It's one of the differences between rock and pop, is that your average rock song, take a guy like Ted Nugent singing Wang Dang Sweet Poontang, the music matches the lyrics. But when you've got a pop band that's singing a sweet, very accessible, very upbeat song, and then they've got these raunchy lyrics on top of it, that's a completely different feel, and it's a different audience. So especially if you think about if you were a parent in 1979, let me just take a step back from that and say the vast majority of people in any music genre don't listen to the lyrics. Maybe in rap, because the vocals are so powerful on top of relatively minimal music. I don't know. But rock, pop, you have to be a pretty deep fan to get into the lyrical content of it, right? What most people hear is the sound of it, and they're not so much interested in what it actually says. I'll never forget, I was having a chat one time with Martin Popoff. Martin's a huge fan of this band Love Hate. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Love Hate, they wrote that song, Rock Queen, about this 13-year-old blonde. And it has these really raunchy lyrics about it. I won't quote them. You can look it up if you want, about a 13-year-old blonde girl. And now this is Martin Popoff. So he's a pretty big music geek. And his exact answer was, I never noticed that. How can you not notice that? Yeah. So unless you get into the lyrics, you would never notice it. I was thinking, what, the first 3 tracks on this album lure you into a false sense of security, right? And then they come in with, what is track number 4? Selfish. She's So Selfish. And it's like, bam. But it sounds beautiful. If you like this style of music, and God forbid there's anybody who hasn't heard My Sharona, man, go play that song and it will be in your head for days. It is one of the best pop songs ever.
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a few songs on this album that are, not as good as My Sharona, but up there. Good Girls Don't Let Me Out, that are just fantastic. And my view is that this band was definitely more than one song. And as I said, I always dip back into this album, lyrical contact or otherwise, because I think at the end of the day, even the lyrical content compared to today's, a lot of today's, sort of albums, it's a little bit tame. But maybe deeply controversial for 1979. Anyway, Thank you very much for that, Reed. So tell me what you think about this album, The Knack, and the debut. Please subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Put your comments down, and both myself and Reed we're going to have a chat very soon. A lot of good content coming in 2022. All right. Good to see you, Reed. All the best.
All right, rock on, Peter.
See ya.